Equity initiatives for the Biden administration focus externally on services to the American public and internally on the federal government workforce. Having multiple executive orders to address issues of equity is extremely helpful. That's according to Kimberlyn Leary. She's a senior equity fellow at the Office of Management and Budget and a senior vice president at the Urban Institute. Kimberlyn, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Amy, for having me. Delighted to be here.
So there are now 2 executive orders from the president regarding advancing equity and inclusion. Outline what they are for us and what the administration is trying to accomplish.
Of course. So the Racial Equity EO is the very first executive order signed by President Biden, and it affirms the importance and responsibility of government delivering effectively and equitably to the American public. And so that executive order focuses on government agencies delivering equitable outcomes in the services, programs, and other activities that they offer. What's important about this executive order is that it tasks both the Domestic Policy Council and the Office of Management and Budget, where I sit, with supporting agencies to do 2 main things. The first is to stand up an equity assessment of programs and services and other activities to determine if there are barriers to equity. And the second thing it asks all agencies to do is to identify action plans that will help to close gaps and mitigate barriers. The other executive order on workforce is equally important, but very distinct. Now, what it focuses on and affirms is that the federal workforce should reflect the diversity of the American public. So the Workforce EO asked agencies to systematically embed equity and diversity, inclusion, accessibility, and in some frameworks, belonging into all of the processes that go into recruiting and hiring and promoting within the federal workforce.
So Kimberlyn,
on the one hand, yes.
Sorry to cut you off, but do you see this as a positive to have 2 executive orders, or is this more of a burden on federal agencies?
I think it's a tremendous opportunity, because what's really required is to build up what we call muscle memory. And the work and capabilities that are needed to advance equity in the workforce are different from, but related to, those that are required to advance equity and outcomes. So what agencies are doing through these 2 executive orders and a portfolio of others that also include equity is building up that muscle memory and building up their capabilities for equity.
So let's talk about your recommendations then for agencies to assess equity within their services to the public.
Sure. So the executive order calls for several things. First, for agencies to create an equity team, not just of the coalition of the willing, but with particular differentiated roles like evaluation and data and other roles that we know bring capacity to equity assessments. The second thing is for agencies to engage in broad-based stakeholder conversations so that their work and the insights of stakeholders is represented in this effort. And third, because developing this muscle memory requires an investment in people and in new knowledge, we've stepped up an equity learning community and have delivered well over 30 executive education style modules to the federal workforce.
And what about internally for the workforce and their hiring procedures and also retention policies?
So that's a very important part of the Workforce EO, and it rests on several pillars. The first of these is that accessibility is paramount, and we want to make sure that the federal workforce is accessible and that there are opportunities for those with disabilities. The second is the Workforce EO includes the first comprehensive, I believe, the first comprehensive approach to sexual harassment and other forms of harassment in the workforce. And this EO also affirms the importance of the federal government being an employer of choice for LGBTQ individuals and offers pathways for those who are formerly incarcerated. I think another critical part of this workforce, and this goes to the early career folks, is to reduce the reliance on unpaid labor, unpaid internships, so that those who come from low income backgrounds or first generation Americans can also explore public service at an early phase in their career, and that often sets the stage for joining the federal workforce later on.
So, Kimberlyn, what do you think is the best way to ensure that any gains in equity aren't just short-lived and actually continue into the long term past the current administration?
Exactly. So we use two metaphors here. We talk about the sprint activities, the things that agencies can do now with their equity assessments or known barriers and try to address those. But the long-term work, we use the metaphor of a marathon, that it takes stamina, it takes planning, and it takes then execution over time. And to do that work, the most important opportunity we have is to build equity into the normal way in which government works. So it's a little wonky, but one of the most exciting dimensions of both EOs is how they include equity in things like agency priority goals, strategic planning, agency learning agendas, and budget templates. This is what will make equity something that is just a regular and comfortable way of addressing equity going forward.
All right. Well, Kimberlyn, thanks so much. Nice talking to you.
Thanks so much.